Hey there, quick video to explain the special Photoshop offer on gaining access to Photoshop for 10 bucks a month. And if you click on the link that's below this video, it'll bring you to this page. And it's a limited time offer that Adobe is presenting right now, and it's actually been available for a little while. It's called a Special Creative Cloud Plan, where they give you access to the latest version of Photoshop, which is Photoshop CC, and Adobe Lightroom, which is their premier photo editing software, and 20 gigs of cloud storage if you want to share files or store or backup or anything like that. And they're only charging $10 a month. It's $9.99 a month when you sign up for a 1 year plan. Now, the 1 year plan is basically like a contract. You're just agreeing that you're going to pay $9.99 a month for 12 months. Okay, so all things considered, it works out to about 120 bucks a year. Okay, now, considering what you're gaining access to, it really is an extreme value. It's actually shocking what they're offering. I've been using Photoshop for a long time, well over 20 years, since it was in version 2. And up until recently, I've had to pay the big money to gain access to it, just like you would normally have to. This option here is pretty insane, actually, especially whenever you consider that the cost of doing business, especially with creating digital products, can become expensive, as you might imagine. There's some basics that you always need, like hosting, which is going to run you anywhere from $10 a month up to $50 or more a month, depending on who you're using and all of that. You need an autoresponder, like Aweber, for instance. Their cheapest plan is $19 a month. Okay, if you sign up for a shopping cart, whether it's Nanocast or One Shopping Cart or somebody else, you're going to be paying around $97 a month. So, in light of those costs, to me, having a software program like Photoshop, it's a premier program. It's the graphic design program that you can use to not only create products, but all your web graphics and everything else. You're talking 33 cents a day. Okay, 33 cents a day. So a quarter, a nickel, 3 pennies, you're good to go every single day. So if you think about it, it's kind of crazy, right? I think it's pretty crazy. $2 a week, which is less than what you would get one single drink at Starbucks for. So once you're on this page, you'll notice that there's a link here at the top that says purchase for US $9.99 a month. You'll simply click on that, and if you don't have an Adobe ID, you will need to create one. Creating an Adobe ID, there is no cost, but you have to have one in order to participate in this program. And by the way, this is a limited time program. Adobe has extended it multiple times, but their current deadline, I believe, is May 31st, so you don't want to delay. They very well could extend it again. They have, like I said, 3 or 4 times they've extended the deadline, and they may do so again. I don't know, but I'd rather see you not take that chance. So, in order to sign up, you simply need to create an Adobe ID if you haven't already, and you just simply click on that, enter in an email address that you want as a primary email address, your name, first and last name, password, where you're from, your date of birth. Okay, hit create. Now, I'm not going to take you through that process. I already have an Adobe ID, and if I log into that, we won't be able to see the rest of what we need to do here, so I'm not going to do that. But once you create your Adobe ID and you log in, you'll review your membership details, which will basically explain how you will gain access to Photoshop and Lightroom for $9.99 a month for 1 year's contract. You'll provide your payment information, Visa, MasterCard, so on, and then confirm. Once you confirm, they will send you all the information and everything that you need, the links and everything, to download both Lightroom and Photoshop that you can download and install, whether you're PC or Mac, it doesn't matter. And just follow their instructions to install it, set it up, and you'll be ready to go. If you decide that you don't want to purchase Photoshop right now, they do still offer a 30-day trial that you can download the software, use the full version for 30 days. There's no cost to do that. I believe you still need to set up an Adobe ID to download that, but it is free for 30 days, and then at the end of 30 days, of course, it will no longer work. Now, all the training, of course, that's presented in this course uses the latest version of Photoshop, Photoshop CC. So a lot of the technology is backward compatible if you have an older version of Photoshop, like CS6, CS5.5. There's a few features that's in CC that isn't in those earlier versions, but I believe that most everything that I covered in the training would be in an older version if you happen to have one of those or buy one on eBay or whatever. But I strongly recommend taking this path. The cost is very minimal. It's almost shocking. And it will give you access to the latest updates and the latest version of the software. And Adobe is very regular at creating updates. It's one thing I appreciate about them, is that they're on top of things. They're constantly improving the software. And so you want to stay on the cutting edge, especially considering how much you can do with this program. Everything from designing your products, designing your web presence, your header graphics, so on and so forth. I hope that you found this helpful, and I look forward to having you walk through all of the training, and I wish you the best of luck. In this video, we're going to take a look at the toolbar and the options that are available to us. Whenever you first launch Photoshop, you'll notice the interface, and it can seem a bit overwhelming and daunting when you first start working with Photoshop, but our goal through this training series is to really remove the fear of God from you, so to speak, so that you can be very comfortable in using and working with the tools. And the primary focus that we want to take a look at related to the tools is the toolbar, which by default is installed on the left-hand side in a single column over here, and then across the top you notice that there is a secondary set of controls, and that is for each tool that's available to us. So if I click on the Move tool, you'll notice that the options across the top here change. Same with the Marquee tool. If I select the Marquee tool, you'll notice again that these options change. And so the options across the top are dedicated specifically to each tool, depending on which one we choose. You'll also notice that in the lower right-hand corner of many of the tools, matter of fact, nearly all of the tools, there's a small arrow pointing to the lower right. Whenever you left mouse click and hold that, it brings up additional tools that are related to that specific tool. So in this case, you can see where we have the rectangular marquee tool, the elliptical marquee tool, the single row marquee tool, and the single column marquee tool. And by default, the rectangular tool is the one chosen. If you want to switch, say, to the elliptical tool, you just move your cursor until that's the one highlighted and release it, and now that is the primary tool that's selected. You'll notice that it's also showing up here in the top, and there are no tool presets. Some of the tools you'll find actually have presets that are available to you that you can use. Like, for instance, if I choose the brush tool and then click on it up here, you'll notice that it has 2B, airbrush, soft round, 50% flow. These are presets. Very often, I never use those presets because there's so much more control that we have over many of the tools. Like, for instance, we can choose different brushes here. We can set the size, the hardness, and so on. And we're going to look at that in another video later on. But another thing that I want to point out here about the toolbar interface is that you actually have some flexibility as far as position. Okay, here in the upper left-hand corner, you'll notice two arrows, and whenever you click on those, it will change the toolbar layout format from a single column to a double column. And depending on your workflow and what you're comfortable with, this can actually perhaps work better for you. Another option that you have with the toolbar, and actually with all of the different workspace bars that are available to you, is that you'll notice that there's a series of dark rectangles here. And if you left mouse click and hold your left mouse key down and drag, it separates the toolbar from the interface so that you can then position it anywhere you like. And as a matter of fact, you can actually drag it over here to the right-hand side, and you'll notice how you have the vertical blue line. That shows that it wants to dock to the right-hand side workspace windows that are there. And so if I release my mouse, it snaps it into this workspace. Okay? If I decide, you know what, I don't really like it there, I can, again, click on the dark rectangles, drag it out, and if I so choose, move back over to the left-hand side, and you'll notice the blue vertical bar appears again. I can release it, and it'll lock it back into the interface. So that's our toolbars. As we go through the video series here, we're going to look at many of these and how they work in detail. But for now, I wanted to introduce you to those. In the next video, we're going to take a look at the various workspaces that are available to us. Whenever you first launch Adobe Photoshop CC, in addition to noticing the toolbar that you have available to you on the left-hand side, you also notice on the right-hand side there's a number of panels. And these panels are part of workspaces that Adobe has offered to us. And one of the things that I really like about this version of Photoshop is that we have multiple workspaces to choose from by default, or we can create our own, and I'll show you how to do that in just a moment. But if I click this drop-down menu where it says Essentials, this is the basic setup for our Essentials workspace. So if we want to just do some basic work in Photoshop, say on a header graphic or something like that, the Essentials workspace may work fine. We have access to our colors, we have adjustments and styles available here, layers, channels, and paths, the basics, right? Now, if I click on that, however, and you'll notice that there are additional options available to us. And really, these options are based on themes. Like, for instance, if we wanted to do work primarily with 3D, which Photoshop now supports a lot of 3D options. We can choose that workspace and it'll change what's available to us that would make the most sense for us if we were working with a 3D object in Photoshop. The same is true with painting. You'll notice that now the primary feature here are our brush presets. We have info, navigator, and properties, all of which are very helpful. And another thing that I want to point out here, you'll notice that this secondary panel is changing as well. This is history. We have our brush controls, our cloning sources, and tool presets. If I click on that button, it maximizes it. Right now, we haven't done any work, so there is no history. If I click on the brush settings, you'll notice that it expands out and gives us a lot of detailed options with our brushes, and we're going to look at these here in another video. But just additional controls that really give us additional flexibility at our fingertips, but they're nice and neatly hidden away for us. And of course, these change as we change our workspaces. So if we choose photography and you want to do a lot of work just on images, you'll notice that once again the primary panels have changed, as have these panels as well. Okay, so now we have access to actions. The properties was moved from over here to here because it's really a secondary piece of information. Same with our character tools. So if we want to work with a specific font, say you wanted to take a photograph that you took and add some kind of a quote to it to create a meme for Facebook or something like this, this would be a perfect workspace for that by default because all the tools that you need to create that are right here at your fingertips. Same with typography. Let's say that you wanted to create something that was type heavy or you had a lot of words that you wanted to add. By selecting that workspace, you can actually have access to all the primary tools that you need. You can see now character and paragraph are dominant here in this area of the workspace. History is usually a part of this panel always because it's kind of like undo, multiple levels of undo, and we'll take a look at that in future videos. Or you can create your own. Like let's say that there's specific tools that you use on a regular basis, and that's been true for me. You can go in and organize one according to what you prefer. So if I click on New Workspace, I can name it Tony's Default, click Save, and then you'll notice that it's still the same as what was there, okay? But now I can reorganize and rearrange this. Like, for instance, let's say that I don't really need two versions of, I don't really want the paragraph styles and character styles. I can come up here to Window, and you'll notice how there are check boxes next to paragraph styles. I can click on that, and it'll remove that. But let's say that I do want to include actions. So or let's say adjustments. So I can click on adjustments, and it's already here, okay? We see it that it's already here. I can actually drag it over here, and now it's available to me on a regular basis. So did you see what I did? I just dragged it from this panel over to this one, and the horizontal blue line, which told me that it's ready to dock, inserted it there. So I can literally come down through this list. These are all of the different panels that we have that we can work with, and we can position them anywhere we want. And as we do that, it actually saves it automatically to our workspace. So that if I come up here and say switch back to painting, and then come back again and choose my default workspace, notice that it changes it back to what I originally selected as I was customizing it. So as you begin to use Photoshop on a more regular basis and get used to certain tools that are your go-to tools on a regular basis, you can construct a workspace that you're most comfortable with without having to, constantly switch between the different workspaces. I found in my work with Photoshop that there are some advantages to the default workspaces, especially if I'm doing a lot of painting and then I want to add type. Rather than creating a brand new workspace that has some of the painting tools and some of the type tools, I'll just switch back and forth. You can switch to any other workspace at any given time during your creative process, and it doesn't affect the work that you're doing on your image. It only affects the tools that are available to you. Okay, so workspaces are a very powerful option when working with Photoshop CC. Creating a new document in Photoshop is pretty straightforward. If you come up to File, choose New, you receive a number of options, and you can see our interface here. We can choose to set our width in inches and pixels, all the standard measurements. Let's say that you want to create a new document for your Facebook timeline. So we want to choose pixels. Resolution for any web-based document is 72. And then we know from looking at Facebook's recommended dimensions that the width of a timeline cover is 851 pixels. The width is 315, or excuse me, I had that backwards. The width is 851, the height is 315. The background we can leave to white. Color profile, pixel aspect ratio. The defaults in Photoshop are usually perfectly fine for 99.9% of the work that you'll do with it. So all we need to do, once we have our correct dimensions inserted into our setup here, is click OK. And the ending result is a panel that is to the exact dimensions that we need to create a Facebook timeline header image. If you wanted to create, say, a graphic for a new book cover, and the book cover dimensions are 6 by 9 inches, for instance, again, we would come up to File, click New. In this case, we would change our measurement ruling to inches. And because we want to create a print cover, we would actually change the resolution to 300 in this case, because we're working with print. If we're creating a 6 by 9 inch cover for our book, 6 by 9 is the actual trim width, but normally we would want to allow bleed, correct? So normal bleed for a print document is 1/8 of an inch, which is 0.125. So typically you'll want to allow 0.125 times 2 for both the width and the height. So what that means is we would want to create a document with a width of not 6 inches, but 6.25 to allow for the bleed for our cover. We would want to create the document height as 9.25 to allow for the bleed top and bottom. And once we have that set, we can click OK. Working with your own files in Photoshop is very straightforward. To open an existing document or photograph, you simply come up to File, choose Open. You want to find the folder that contains the file that you want to work with. In this case, I already have a folder open called PS Docs. I'm going to select this photo right here, the sunset, and choose Open. And it opens the file in Photoshop. Now, you can open multiple files when you're importing existing documents into Photoshop. You can just simply choose File, Open, and then holding the Control or the Command key down, depending on whether you're on a PC or a Mac, you can select multiple files. So I could select this sunset and this cartoon character here, choose Open, and you'll notice that the files were opened in Photoshop in their own tab. So each one is isolated, and you can work on them independently or combine them, and we're going to look at how to do that in an upcoming video. Let's say that the existing document that you're working with needs to be sized to a different resolution than what the current size is. Simply click Image, Image Size, and it'll show you what the current resolution is. You'll notice that the current size here is 75.958 inches by 50.625 at a resolution of 72, and that's pretty large. Let's say that we actually want to use this photograph for a Facebook timeline header, and we definitely need to scale it down. So first thing we're going to do is change the dimensions from inches to pixels, and you can see what our pixel width and height is. And you'll remember from a previous video that the dimensions for the Facebook timeline cover is 851, and you'll notice that automatically it sizes the image to a height of 567, which is actually higher than what our height needs to be for our final version. And if we wanted to actually adjust the image to the literal pixels here, you'll notice we have this little chain. If I click on that and turn it off, then I can rescale the height independently of the width. If I have it selected, everything scales dynamically, keeping the photograph, in this case, in direct proportion. So if I choose 851 and click OK, it'll scale the image down to the actual size, and then we can crop it to get to our final dimension height of 315 pixels. Now, you also notice that the image has gotten a lot smaller on the screen. And so the easiest way to zoom in on the image, you have two options. One is to actually come over to the toolbar and click on the zoom, and just click zooming it in until you get it to the size that you want to work with, which this is actually at 100% right here. The other option is, if you're on a PC, you can use Control plus and minus. If you're on a Mac, you can use Command plus or minus. And by choosing those options, it also allows you to zoom in or out. Now, along with the scaling, we also have an option. You'll notice from before, we imported other images, and they're in tab form. And let's say that we want to take this image of Dexter and combine it with our sunset picture here. The easiest way to do that in this newer version of Photoshop is to click our Move tool, left mouse click and drag this character onto the tab where we want him to go and then release it. And it instantly moves him from the tab that he was on, which he's still there, it's just a copy, but it moves it and places it into our image here. Now, an alternative way of doing that is to copy and paste, and I'll show you how to do that as well. But before I do, I want to point out that you'll notice that whenever I moved him into this document, that over here in the layers palette, he is actually now on his own layer. And the original is still here as the background file, and Dexter was added to a layer above him, and that happens by default. Okay, so it works very seamlessly. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, you can also copy and paste. You can use the keystroke command of Control or Command A to select all, then Control or Command C to copy, and then come over to your document and use Control or Command V to paste. And you get the same end result, except that whenever the new file is pasted, it's pasted centered, as you can see here. If I turn off the original one that we had dragged over into our document, you'll notice that whenever I pasted it pasted it absolutely centered. Now, you actually, whenever you're pasting an image into an existing document, you can actually control where its positioning will paste into using a little trick. And I'll just show you this trick since we're talking about this. If you choose the rectangular marquee tool, and let me actually delete this guy here. I'm just going to click the trash can. And so that'll delete the layer. Yes, I want to delete. Now, I'm going to, with the rectangular marquee tool, I'm going to draw just a little box. It doesn't have to be any particular size. I'm just going to put it down here in the lower left-hand corner. And so this selection is here. There's nothing in it. You notice that there's no new layers or anything like that. But what happens is that now whenever I choose Paste, Control V, or you can access Copy and Paste from the Edit menu, you'll see Copy and Paste are right here. Okay, but when I hit Control or Command V now, what'll happen is the rectangular marquee selection will control where the image will paste. Watch. So now the image pastes centered on the selection that I had selected, and of course the selection that was made vanishes whenever the document pastes, and it also still pastes it into its own layer. So you can actually have some control over where your document pastes if you need that control, but by default it will paste to the absolute center of the existing image that you're pasting into. Another important part of the document management process in Photoshop is, of course, saving your document. And you have the option to both save and save as, like you do on most programs. And to access that option, you simply click File and choose Save if you want to save over top of the existing file. If you've made changes, it's likely that you'll want to actually choose Save As. And so whenever I choose Save As, it brings up the original file name and the fact that it was a JPEG image. It gives me the option of where to save the document. I could save it in its original folder or choose a new folder to save it into. And then the format. And there's a number of formats that are available in Photoshop, some of which you'll use on a very regular basis. Others you may never use at all. Okay, the most common ones are the native Photoshop format, which is the PSD format. And that's extremely important to use if you're making any kind of changes in Photoshop that include layers and paths and those kinds of things that you may want to go back and edit later. If you're done with your work and you've already saved a Photoshop version of your work, you may want to then select one of the other options depending on what its final use is. If you're going to be using your document for the web, then JPEG or PNG would be the best options for you to use. If you're saving your document for print, whether it's a book cover or perhaps it's graphics for a brochure, you're going to be using it to further create a document using a layout program like Adobe InDesign, then your choice may want to be TIFF, the TIFF file format, which is a PostScript file format that is fully compatible with image setters that you would use for printing commercially. And then finally, I want to highlight the Photoshop PDF format, which is based on the Adobe Acrobat file format. And by using Photoshop PSD, it has some unique features with it being used in Photoshop. For instance, it does have the ability to maintain layers. You can also convert the layers into separate pages within the PDF. Okay, so that is an option for us as well. And as a matter of fact, if we choose that option here, now we only have a single layer, but I can choose to save this as a PDF, and then I click Save. It brings up a warning, which you can turn off, and I'll click OK, and it brings up the standard Adobe PDF presets, high quality, press quality, smallest file size, and so on. And I'm going to go with the default high quality print. If you want to preserve Photoshop editing capabilities, like if our document had layers and you wanted to maintain that, you would make sure that this checkbox was checked. If you want to optimize it for fast web, which is a default, and usually I leave that checked as well, you can do that. If you want to view the PDF after saving it, you would check this box, and what will happen is whenever you click Save PDF, it will launch Adobe Acrobat if you have that installed and give you the opportunity to view the PDF and how it appears. With compression, typically, in most cases, the default settings are what you're always going to use. The same with output. The default usually makes sense. You don't need to embed color models or anything like that. Very often, you can require a password if it's a sensitive document. You would just simply check that and then enter a password here. You can also restrict printing, editing, and so on if you want to do that. And then the summary is basically just the choices that you've made for the setup. Okay, so once you've selected all of these options, you'd simply choose Save PDF. And we're going to say yes in this particular case. And it tells you that if you preserve Photoshop editing capabilities, it's incompatible with earlier versions of Photoshop. So since we're using the latest version of Photoshop, I'm just going to move forward with yes. And you'll notice here it says saving 10%. So it'll actually tell me how far along it is in the saving process. You can also see that down here at the bottom of the screen where it says saving 10%. And then it's done. And so now our document is actually a PDF, and we have the original JPEG version as well. If I wanted to change the document and save it as a PNG, let's just select PNG, and I choose Save, it's going to give me separate options. One is related to compression. If I want no compression and make the document open fast, I would choose that. The default is to choose smallest. In other words, to make the PNG file the smallest that it can be, and it takes longer to do that. Okay. Normally with interlace, you would select none. I can click OK, and my PNG version is saved. If I was saving this document for print and I was choosing the TIFF option, click Save. And it gives me several choices here. One for compression. I normally use LZW and none of the others. With pixel order, the default is typically fine. Interleaved. Byte order, it depends on whether you're using a PC or a Mac. I'm on a Mac, so I would choose that. The other options here, you probably will never use. So you just click OK, and you're done. An additional file saving option that you have in Photoshop, if you are wanting to save files specifically for the web, is the Save for Web option. And you'll notice here in this image that I have on the screen, we have a picture of Dexter, cartoon character, and I've removed the background that was in this illustration, and so it's currently transparent. And perhaps you want to save this image for the web, but maintain the transparency that exists there. So Photoshop gives you a number of options in order to actually save for the web. Let's just go to File, Save for Web, and take a look at the options that we have. So here is our file, and you'll notice over here on the right there's a number of presets. One is, normally the default is PNG24, and that is the preset that we would typically use to maintain the transparency of the document. And you can see they actually have a checkbox that allows us to make sure that that transparency is maintained. If I were to set this to JPEG, which is another web-based file format, say JPEG High, you'll notice how it removes the transparency, because the JPEG file format doesn't maintain transparency at all. It isn't created as a file format in order to do that. But we can adjust the quality here with a slider, depending on how high or how low a quality our JPEG needs to be. There's also presets, JPEG High, Low, and Medium. Another option that we have here is to save our file format in the GIF file format. And this can come in handy if you're created animated GIFs, where each layer is another frame in the animation. And so in that case, you would select one of these, like, say, GIF 128 dithered, and you'll notice that it does maintain transparency. We do have that option here. And you have control over how many colors are rendered, and you can see the color table listed here. Okay, so you know exactly what is going to be saved from a document and information perspective if you're saving it in this file format. Okay, so in this case, we're going to select PNG24, and we want to maintain the transparency. There is no color table because it's saving it in the full 24-bit file format, which means we're getting all of the data that we need. And by the way, you'll notice down here in the left-hand corner, it actually tells you the final file size. So in the PNG24 file format, the final file will be around 84.82 kilobytes. Okay, if I were to switch that over to, say, JPEG High, you notice that it actually is much smaller, 19.8. If I chose, say, GIF 128 dithered, it's 22K. So PNG is definitely a larger file format because you're preserving more color data without compression. And that's really a big point that we want to make here. So once you choose the web file format that you want to use, in this case we're going to use PNG 24, simply click Done. And that's it. It automatically saved it to the folder where I had chosen. In this video, we're going to take a look at the transform tools that are available to us in Photoshop. And you'll locate these tools under Edit. And you'll see in this section here, we have Content Aware Scale, Perspective Warp, Free Transform, and so on. The first one we want to look at is Content Aware Scale. This is a newer tool that's available in Photoshop. You'll notice right now it's not active, and that's because you can't apply it to just a background layer. So the very first thing we need to do is actually make a copy of the background. And to do that, I'm going to left mouse click and just drag it down to the little box right next to the trash can, which is Layer Duplicate. And now I have an exact copy of my background. So if I come back up to Edit, you'll notice that Content Aware Scale is now active. And the primary purpose of Content Aware Scale is to maintain the overall integrity of the image while allowing you to scale it unevenly in a certain direction. In this case, I'm going to scale it from the left. We're just going to scale it horizontally and leave the height as is. And something pretty magical happens as I start to scale from the left. You'll notice that the integrity of the windmill is remaining pretty much intact, but the program is automatically removing space from where the barn is and in the sky. And you'll also notice the same in the trees as well. And so as I continue to scale this over, it's just taking bits and pieces out of the original image and averaging it so that it still blends together well. And so right now I'm up to 2.5 inches that I've already scaled this image, and you'll notice that while the windmill is shifted a little further to the right, it's still pretty much intact, and the program is preserving that as well. Same with this area of the tree line. So the program is very aware from a content perspective and chooses on its own where to remove information to maintain the overall integrity of the photo. So if I hit enter to apply this and we compare it to the original, you'll notice that the windmill is nearly 100% intact. It's still a very attractive image. It's just that it reduced the size of the barn and the size of the trees, primarily over here on the right. Now there's a tiny little bit of artifacting right here at the top of the barn, but that could be easily smoothed out using the clone stamp or even a blur tool. So it's a very powerful tool. It's somewhat specialized. It really depends on the type of images that you're scaling. In other words, you likely wouldn't want to use it on people, but landscapes, architecture even, those types of photographs, it's perfectly suited for. Now the next tool that we're going to take a look at is also in this area, and it's called Perspective Warp. And the primary purpose of Perspective Warp is to straighten photographs that have angles in the architecture or in the landscape due to wide-angle shots. If you're using a wide-angle lens on your camera, whether it's a point and shoot, your smartphone, or digital SLR, and you aim up toward the top of a building like you see here, the lens tends to distort the angle of the building, so it doesn't maintain it perfectly vertical as you see here. It's actually angled from the bottom to the top, facing toward the right. The tool that we're going to look at here, Perspective Warp, actually allows you to fix that in a very specific way. So whenever I select that tool, and you notice in this case I didn't have to make a copy of the background, although I could have, but the first thing I'm going to do is click over here on this part of the building, and it creates a mesh. And I'm just going to drag the points of this mesh so that it lines up evenly with this face of the building. And actually, I'm going to go over to this corner edge here, like so. Next thing I'm going to do is create a secondary mesh. I'm going to click again, and I'm going to join it to this one. And you notice as I'm getting close to the corner, they highlight in blue, which means it'll auto snap, okay? And then I'm going to position the mesh so that it proportionally corresponds to the building here. Now we're not affecting the courthouse in this particular building. This is the square of the town that I live in. I'm just primarily interested in straightening this building right now. And you'll notice on the right here, this building is also angled in. We could come back and fix that as well. So once we have our meshes in place to mirror the approximate perspective of this office building here, I'm going to come up to the top, and right now layout is selected, and I'm going to click on warp, okay? When I click on warp, it gives me the ability to begin shifting the mesh so that I can actually straighten this building and just adjust it accordingly. And you don't have to go overboard with it. You can just adjust it a little bit. But let's say that I find that that's satisfactory. I hit enter. And if we come up here to history and you compare the two, this is before and this is after. So now you can see that the distortion that was created from the wide angle lens is now gone. Now, of course, to make up that difference, it also warped the edge of the picture, but you could either crop the picture or fill this in using some clone stamping just to make up this difference, okay? But it's a very easy way to straighten, especially architecture and certain kinds of landscapes. If you have tall trees and they're angling in because of a wide-angle lens, this is the perfect tool, perspective warp, in order to fix those images. Now, next in the transform, we're going to look at the free transform tool. And to actually work with this particular tool, I'm going to switch back over to our, actually, you know what, let's stick with this picture here, and I'm going to take the cartoon that we have here of Dexter, and I'm going to move it into this photograph. And so he's actually here in the corner, okay? And let's say that I want the building and everything to scale down just a little bit. If I come up to Edit, Free Transform, this gives me the ability to scale disproportionately. I can scale up and down this way, horizontally and vertically. If I hold the Shift key down, it will lock the proportion. But if I right mouse click, you'll notice that I have access to all the other points. Right now I'm using Free Transform, okay? But I also have the ability to choose Rotate, so that I could rotate the image if I wanted to. I can skew the image, okay, which basically just angles the image on either a horizontal or vertical line. I can choose Perspective, which you'll notice that both sides are angling in, depending on which angle that I'm choosing. And I can also even choose Warp. So that gives me the ability to actually expand some of the areas of the image by clicking on the center points. So it's as if it's warping plastic or something like that. So you have some definite control there over how it works. And you notice that you have the Bezier curve handles, and those are what you're using to actually shift this image. So I'm going to hit Escape to get out of that, and actually I'm going to work with a copy. And let's just come back here to transform. We went through these basic tools, but let's look at scale again. And I'm going to scale this down. And let me zoom in here so we can see this a little bit better. So we have the scale, we have our guy here. I'm going to set him over here on the straight. He's kind of going, right? And I can actually use the same transform on him as well. Again, you'll notice if I choose Free Transform, I literally have the ability to change any of these. And I have instant access just by right mouse clicking. But let's say that I want to reposition him. Like, instead of having him as is, let's say that I want him facing the other direction. Well, we have flip horizontal and flip vertical. If I choose flip horizontal, it instantly flips him. So I could move him over here like this, put him in the middle of the road. And now he's facing toward the courthouse here. I can also take a look at maybe just, let's see. We have the ability to rotate 180 degrees, 90 degrees clockwise, 90 degrees counterclockwise. In this case, we have no need to rotate, but these are set standards because people use them a lot. If you need to just rotate freely, you can choose that, and you can just rotate to whatever angle you need. And you'll notice that the degree angle that you're rotating is also being shown on the screen. You'll also notice that it's being shown up here in the top toolbar area, which is important. Another distinction is that if you hold the Shift key down, it will rotate it in increments of 15 degrees. Okay? Same is true with scale. If I choose Edit, Transform, Scale, you'll notice that I can scale him freely, or I can hold the Shift key down and he'll scale proportionately. And you'll notice that the width and the height percentages are also up here. You can lock them by clicking the little chain. And that way, however I scale, it's always going to scale proportionately. Okay, so you have a lot of control both here and in the top toolbar as well. And again, I can right mouse click and choose Distort. And so now I'm going to unlock the width and the height. With Distort, I can just take one corner and scale him that way, and the other three corners remain intact. Okay? And the same, again, is true with Warp and Perspective, and we looked at those already. So those are the transform tools. They're very powerful. You can use them in multiple settings, and you're going to find yourself using them in a lot of different scenarios. And as we go through these videos and get into some of the case studies, we're going to be using them as well in different scenarios. So you'll want to watch for those and really familiarize yourself with them. Photoshop gives us the ability to change the color mode in our photographs, and the modes are located under Image. You'll see here we have multiple choices: bitmap, grayscale, duotone, index color, RGB, CMYK, lab color, and multi-channel. And then we also are showing the bit depth for each channel. And there aren't many occasions where you're going to want to or need to pay attention to the bits per channel. So we're really not going to look at those or go into any detail with those. Same with lab color and multi-channel. 99% of the time you'll never use those. So the ones we're going to focus on primarily are CMYK, RGB, and grayscale. And then I'll also show you duotone and bitmap. So you'll notice that by default, the photograph we have here is in RGB color, and that's typical most of the time. And for any web work that you're doing, most of the time RGB is fine. In a few rare occasions, especially if you want to create an animated GIF image, GIF, you will want to switch it to index color. But quite honestly, those are falling more and more out of style. And so it's a very rare occasion where you would actually use index color. The difference between RGB color and index color is that with index color, it actually tracks the colors that are being used in the image, and you can control how many colors are being shown at any given time, as low as perhaps 8 colors up to 256. So if we choose index color, you'll notice that I can select how many colors I want it to show. And if I go with, let's change it. Rather than go with 256, we can change it to 16. They also have some presets, but we're not really going to pay attention to those. So I'm going to change it just to 16 colors. And when I click OK, watch what happens. So the image has changed some, and everything that you see here is one of 16 colors. That's it, okay? As opposed to if I change it to, say, 8 colors. This is 8 different colors, and essentially it looks like it's just different shades of the same color, right? And the same is true if I change it to, say, 256 colors. It has more to draw on, and so it look closer to the original. Matter of fact, you can't see much of a difference at all. But in most cases, you really won't need to use index color at all. Now, CMYK is another story. If you are using any kind of illustration, photograph, anything that's created in Photoshop for print, ultimately that file will need to be converted to CMYK. And to do that, you just simply select CMYK color. It will show you what the default color profile is, and in most cases, you can use that default profile. We're not going to take time in this series to get into different color profiles and what they mean, but in 99% of the cases that you'll encounter, US Web Coded version 2 profile is perfect for what you're using. Essentially, this defines what most printing presses are running these days. So I'm just going to click OK. And you'll notice that really nothing has changed. The only thing that will change is that there's certain colors, like really bright blues, for instance, or super bright greens, that can't print in a CMYK process. The range for commercial printing is limited to a certain extent, and so it'll change those colors to the nearest color-safe version of that particular color. And you can notice that really well if you bring up the color palette. You notice here, if I click in these reds, or you know what, let's go to green. Notice how with this bright green that I have selected here right now, see where there's an exclamation mark over this version here? What this is telling you, it's related to our CMYK process, it's telling you that this current version, this color that I have chosen, won't reproduce correctly in a CMYK environment. And so if you are designing or creating something that's to be for print and you're filling with a specific color, what you want to do is click on the color underneath the exclamation mark, and it'll reset that color to a web. And I mean, by web, I mean printing web. By a CMYK print environment, it'll reset that so that now you know that it's safe. If I come up here and select another color that isn't CMYK safe, you'll notice that the alert shows up again. Okay, so it really gives you an idea of what will work and what will not work in a CMYK environment. Whenever you convert from RGB to CMYK in a photograph, it automatically detects any of the colors in the entire scene that may be out of bounds for the CMYK process and converts them to its nearest counterpart that's printer safe. Okay, so that's basically what's happening. In most cases, however, you really won't see any difference or any change in your photograph or design at all when you switch to CMYK. And then once you have it switched, you can see now the mode is listed as CMYK. Then you can save your image as a TIFF in most cases for print. Now, the next option that we have for modes is grayscale, and it's pretty much what you think. It turns a color image into a grayscale one, but it isn't the same as desaturating an image, and we're going to look at that in the next video. It literally strips all of the color information out of the image so that it's now just varying shades of black, okay, which is different from a desaturated color image. So there's a lot more information in a desaturated color image, and it'll reproduce differently, whereas a grayscale image is one that you would use, like if you're printing a newspaper in just black and white. That might be a a good use for black and white image this way, or a grayscale image. And so all of that color data is gone except for just the gray, varying shades of gray. Once you have an image in grayscale, that opens up a couple other options, and that's bitmap and duotone. Bitmap you will likely never use. It essentially takes your grayscale image and reduces it down to either black or white. And if I click on it, it asks for our output resolution. The method of diffusion, the default, is normally what you'd want to use. And if I click OK, you can see what happens. And if I zoom in, it's just blacks. It's either black or white, and varying degrees of dots. And so it kind of looks like a pixelized version of our image. But again, unless you're looking for some kind of a specialty technique, you'll never use that option. And then the final option is duotone. And if I click on that, it gives us the ability to select two different colors to create, or in some cases, depending on the option that we choose, more. But if I choose duotone, our first color here is black. We can select a second color, say a brown. And you'll notice that whenever I selected the brown, how it affected the image. So now the image is a combination of the brown and the black. Now you also notice these angles here on the right, or on the left, excuse me. If I click on those, these are actually curves that allow us to tell how much of the color is going to show up in a given area. So like if I want the midtones to be darker, I can increase the curve in the middle here, and you'll notice that at 50% it's increasing to 66.3 right now, as opposed to if I come up here and drag it back down, you'll notice that those numbers are dropping and the colors are changing as well. You can also go in and modify these manually, okay? So in many cases, you'll use a lesser version of the color than you would the black. They also give you some presets that you can choose. Like you can see here, warm gray 8, black 1, warm gray 8, black 2, so on and so forth. So like if I choose, say, warm gray 8, black 3, so warm gray 8 is this color here, and then black is the primary driving color. And you can see how just by selecting the different options that are available, how it literally changes the appearance of the image. And so the image is being made up by just these two colors. Like how the original was RGB, then we converted it to CMYK. This version is now made up of just black and magenta. That's it. Okay, but let's say that we choose, well, probably not that. Let's say we go with Cool Gray 7 and we really like that look. We can click OK. Then what I usually do, because it's so easy to print in full color process, either on an inkjet printer or on a digital printing press or whatever in CMYK, I almost always convert my duotone back to either RGB or CMYK, depending on the use that I'm using. So let's say for this instance, we're just using it for on the web. So I'm going to click RGB, and again, it converts it back to RGB, even though now it's just a duotone image because we stripped out that extra color. Okay, now I'm going to show you how to achieve a similar result using some of the other tools, the adjustment tools, in the next video. Photoshop gives us powerful image adjustment tools that are available under Image and Adjustments, and you'll see there's quite a selection here. They are in groups. First section is based upon exposure of different types. The second affects color. The third affects how the color is handled within the image. The next two affect shadow and highlight. HDR toning is a part of that. And then the last section is a direct effect on color. We have desaturate, we're color shifting, and we're equalizing color. So let's look at each group here individually. First, we'll look at brightness and contrast. And the controls are simple, and they do exactly what you would expect them to. If I move the slider for brightness to the right, it brightens the image. If I move it to the left, it darkens it. So it's pretty straightforward. And the brightening and darkening is global, so every pixel is treated equally. The same is true with contrast. The contrast increases the contrast or decreases the contrast in the image globally, so it doesn't treat certain sections of the image different than others. And you'll see later on as we get into these tools where that can be a significant part of your editing process, because some of the tools allow you to target just highlights or just shadows. And so please know that with the brightness and contrast, everything is happening from a global perspective. Okay. They also give you the option of using auto, where the software reads the image and then makes suggestions on how to correctly balance the image through brightness and contrast. And if I click auto, you notice that it's processing and it changed the brightness slightly and it increased the contrast to 42. And so based on the algorithms in the program, this is what the program would consider a properly balanced image. Of course, in many cases, It's subjective, and we can tweak it to our heart's content to determine what we feel is most appropriate for what we have in mind for our photograph or our graphic. The next option that we have is levels. And levels takes brightness and contrast kind of to the next level because we have a number of options available to us. You'll notice that in the top histogram area, we have shadow, midtone, and highlights. Then below, we have output levels, which is very similar to brightness controls that we just saw. You also notice that there's a number of presets that allow us to achieve specific results, like increasing contrast, lightening shadows, and so on. And then we have channels where we can affect all three channels, red, green, and blue, simultaneously by adjusting the sliders, or we can just adjust one of the three, whichever one we choose. The last section that I want to point out here are the eyedroppers. And the eyedroppers give us a very pixel-specific control. If I double-click on this shadow eyedropper, you'll notice that right now all the values are set to black. And how that works is with the shadow eyedropper selected, if I click on a certain area of the image, let me move this off to the side, wherever I click, it resets that pixel value to whatever the value is for the eyedropper. So in this case, 100%. So if I click in the shadow area, it's going to reset the image based upon where I clicked. Okay. Now, if I click in a light area with the shadow, it's going to extremely darken it because it will take that lighter pixel and reset it to black. That's how the eyedroppers work. Okay. The same is true with the midtone and the highlight. And we have full control over what these values are. In other words, let's say I want to make my highlight area this part of the sky right here. Notice where it reset it to the light blue. Or, you know what, let's go with something a little more pronounced. If I click OK, and then with that eyedropper selected, click anywhere in the image, it resets that value to that blue. Okay, that specific pixel, wherever I'm clicking, it resets it to that value. So it really gives us a lot of control over how our shadows and highlights show up. Okay, so I'm going to hit cancel, and then we're going to open that again. Adjustments, levels. And let's take a look at this section of the levels. First we have shadow. And the further we move the slider to the right, the darker the shadows go. Okay? The further, with the highlight, the further to the left, the brighter the image gets. And then, of course, with the midtones, it affects the middle range of pixels. Now, a couple things to keep in mind when you're working on an image, especially a photograph. Right now, the histogram that you see here is pretty much ideal for this photo because the object of the game is to not have any of the dark area or the light area slammed up against the edges. Now, if you move the sliders to the left or to the right, you'll notice that if you draw a vertical line straight up, all of the pixel ranges from 14 pixels and to the left, those values are now solid black. And the further you move to the right, it's saying that all of the pixel values from 0 to 29 are now solid black. And that's why your image is naturally darkening. Same is true with the right. Right now, the absolute value of 255 is 0% any color. So it's pure white. So the further I move this slider to the left, what it's saying now is all the pixels in the image from number 229 clear up to 255 are now reset to white. That's really what's happening. It's not just a matter of sliding the slider one way or the other to brighten or darken the image. There's actually specific math that goes on behind it. Now, with the output levels, it handles things in a different way. It actually handles them more globally. It ignores highlight, midtone, and shadow. And it functions very similar to contrast and brightness combined. Like if you combine those two together, output levels works very similarly. And you'll notice that you still have the values of 255 and 0, but it functions opposite what happens up here. So in other words, as I move the slider down and we get to the lower numbers, notice how everything is darkening. And it's doing so in a very even, level way. Same is true if I move the slider up from the left. It's lightening everything globally. And you can see how it's very obvious here. So you can actually use the two settings in conjunction with each other to lighten or darken your image, either globally or a little bit more specific to the midtones. Okay, and if you wanted to, let's say that the blue was a little bit out of whack here and we wanted to focus on just that. We can select a new channel instead of RGB. We could come up and select just the blue channel. And now you'll notice that, first of all, the histogram has changed. But if I move the slider for the midtone, all that's affecting is just the blue. Now you'll notice that the image is getting more green or less green. That's because it's adding blue, because I'm moving it to the left, or subtracting blue so that the yellow and the red and the green together shine out more predominantly. So it's affecting the colors that way, but only the blue channel. Okay, so you could literally go in and tweak, say, just that part of the blue channel, then we could come up to the green channel and maybe increase the green this way, or maybe cut it back a little, make it a little darker. And then choose, say, the red channel here. And you notice the further I move to the left, the more red it gets. More to the right, how it gets more blue and green. So you can actually adjust the image that way as well. It's a little more specific channel to channel. And if you compare it to the original, you can see where we actually warmed up the rock a little bit, but the sky is pretty much identical to what it was. So that's the benefit of working with levels in that way, is that you can actually increase contrast some or decrease it using the output levels. And then, of course, even though we've made adjustments in each of these channels, we can also make adjustments globally on the RGB. So I can darken the whole midtone area of the image if I want to. Okay? Next, we have curves. And curves works very similar to levels, except in a lot more precise detail. Whereas curves, we were presented primarily with shadow, midtone, and highlight. Curves, we can get very specific. We can go focus in on a specific tone. You'll notice how it's sharing down here where it says input and output. It's actually telling you the pixel number that I'm on as I go down this scale. And again, you can affect either RGB or just the red, just the green, just the blue. It also comes with presets as well. And just to kind of show you how it works, we're not going to spend a lot of time in this, but if I, say, click on this point right here, which is at 190, I can drag this down, and it's just affecting this image based upon where I'm dragging it down. If I drag it to the left, it's brightening it, but notice how the curve is adjusting. So it's just a different way that I can go in and get specific. So maybe I want this value down here in the darker register to increase in brightness a little bit, but I want to maintain the highlights so that they don't blow out. By using the curves that we have here, we can get very specific on how different tones of the image are being affected. And of course, you want to use it carefully because you can extremely mess up an image. Okay? Like I could bring this value up like this, and now all of a sudden it's kind of funky, which you may think that's cool. But obviously, you know, the primary function of this is to actually retouch images in a certain way. Okay? The next tool that we have in this particular section is exposure. And exposure, again, it is a global tool that affects everything equally. If I move the slider to the right, it just increases brightness, contrast, everything simultaneously. Okay? Offset controls how it's affecting the shadow area. Gamma correction affects how the pixels are being influenced by the exposure, again, across the board. If I choose, say, -2 under the preset, it globally shifts the exposure by -2. So if you take a picture and say it's slightly underexposed, you could come up and choose +1, and it'll just increase the exposure, which there can be some extreme advantages to that. Say everything else is fine, the color, all of that is fine, the contrast even, but you just want to bump up the exposure. That's really where this tool comes into play. Okay, and again, you can go in and be specific with the eyedroppers and control just certain sections of it as well. Okay, so you can see where the offset is being affected. And what it's doing is it's preserving the pixels that I clicked on from the eyedroppers. Okay, the next set of adjustments we're going to take a look at is the color enhancement section. First, we have vibrance. And vibrance is a function of brightening the color, but it works differently than saturation. First of all, with vibrance, as we move the slider to the right, it will increase the colors just subtly. The whole object of vibrance is to maintain the pixel integrity of the image, but just boost the color slightly. So it functions primarily with the color areas in the highlights and a little bit in the midtones, whereas with saturation increases the color globally. So you'll notice that everything is getting more saturated, brighter, all of that together. There are some occasions where saturation can make sense to increase your color slightly. I use vibrance all the time in just giving my photographs a little bit of an extra kick. Like if you're taking pictures in the fall and the trees have color in them, just increasing the vibrance a little bit will still allow the photograph to look real, but just boost up those colors. And there's advantages to doing that because our camera sensors can't always record the colors as we see them. And so tools like vibrance and even saturation give us the ability to add some of that brightness and snap back into our colors. The next tool is hue and saturation. And saturation in this configuration works exactly the same. The lightness control works exactly the same as we saw in levels, the bottom area that we saw in levels. The big difference in this tool is working with hue, and this literally gives us the ability to shift the color scheme globally. So if I left mouse click and drag the cursor to the right, it shifts the hue of the entire image. So all the pixels are being affected accordingly. Same way if I go to the right. And you can achieve some pretty cool effects this way. Even if you're working in graphics and not photographs, hue shift can really come in handy as well. And once again, you can affect the hue in just individual color schemes or across the board with the master. Now, with saturation together with hue, it allows you to brighten the colors or desaturate them. The more you move the slider to the left, the less color shows in the original image. The more you move it to the right, the more color shows. And then lightness, again, is a global brightening or darkening of the image. Now, there's another feature in hue and saturation, and that's colorize. It's off by default. And if I click it and turn it on, essentially what it does is it applies a single color to the overall picture, very similar to what we saw with Duotone, except this is just on one color. And we can choose what that color is by moving the hue throughout the range, and you'll notice that the color corresponds to what you're seeing in this on the rainbow slider here. And then you also have control over how it's being applied from a saturated perspective. So if I have a black or a full color picture and I want to just turn it to, say, an orange like this, Colorize gives me the ability to do that very easy. And by the way, it also works equally as well using black and white photographs. And of course, as always, there's presets that you can achieve specific effects. Like if you want your photograph to look like a cyanotype, you can click that preset and it automatically sets everything so that it appears that way. There are also, let's say you have a certain setting that you really like a lot and you want to keep that, you can actually save that preset. And if you click save, it'll give you the ability to name that preset, and then it'll store it up here in this area so that you can go back to it and just apply it over and over again to your image. The next tool we have is color balance. And color balance gives you the ability to make color tweaks to the different areas, shadow, midtone, and highlight. So you notice right now, midtones is selected. Let's say that I want to just affect the color shading on the shadows. If I click shadow, you'll notice that I have a cyan, magenta, yellow, red, green, and blue. And the more I move the slider to the left, the more yellow is introduced into the shadow area. If I move it to the right, the more blue is introduced to the shadow area. Same with the magenta versus the green, cyan versus red. So you can get very specific with these. If I choose highlights, it's primarily going to target the lighter areas of the picture. Okay? So using these three levels, midtone, highlight, and shadow, you can get very specific in adjusting certain parts of your photograph or image in a way that the other tools can't mirror. Okay? And then once you're happy with how they appear, you can just click OK. The next tool in this section is black and white. And the black and white is different than what we saw with grayscale. It's also different than desaturate because you have the ability to control how the black and white is being converted. And what I mean by that is, remember back when we all used film. If we were shooting with black and white film, putting a filter on the front of our lens controlled how the light was striking the film. And so as a result, if we had a red filter on, the landscape appeared one way versus if we had a green one on. Well, this set of controls mimics that exact same process. So, for instance, on this particular picture, if I increase the blue, you notice that because there was a lot of blue in the sky, it starts to blow the sky out, but it really doesn't affect the other areas that much. Same with the red. If I increase the red, because there's red in this area of the rocks, it actually starts to lighten it up or to darken it. So it gives me the ability to control how the black and white is being converted based upon these colors. Okay, and there's also presets, and you can see like high contrast blue filter. It's blowing out the sky almost completely, but you can see how the settings are set. Same with high contrast red or infrared. If you wanted to mimic the effect of infrared, you could choose that preset. And so literally, regardless of whatever photograph or image that you're working on, you can control exactly what is being shifted into the grayscale arena at the different color levels. So if you have a picture, let's say, that has a lot of yellows in it, you may want to preserve those whenever you're converting it to black and white. And so that may mean turning the yellow section back, but enhancing the blues. If, let's say, that there's a really strong blue sky, by moving the blue slider to the left, you can darken the sky, but keep the tonal range of every other part of the image completely intact. So that's the power of working with the black and white conversion part of the sliders here. Next, in the color adjustment section, we have photo filter. And this is kind of similar to the conversion process, except that, again, when we used film, there were different kinds of film. Like there was daylight film, there was tungsten film. And if you use daylight film indoors, the end result tended to look a little on the cool side or a little blue. And to compensate for that, we would screw different types of filters, again, onto the front of our lens, like a number 85 warming filter or a number 81. And we could also achieve special effects using different filters that we would add to the front of the lens. These photo filters essentially work the same way. Okay, so you notice if I apply the cooling filter 82, it globally affects the entire image as if there was an 82 filter on the front of your camera. Same with green, okay, or deep red. And you would think, right, that it would just be, bam, there's this deep red. But you notice that you can control the density. So you have control over how much your image is being impacted based on the filter that you're choosing, because it may just be a subtle shift that you want to make. You know, like let's say we want to warm this up a little bit, say with an 81 warming filter. You'll notice that if I move it to the right, it warms it up a lot. And by warm means shifts it to the yellow versus the blue. So maybe I just want to shift the image slightly, say 23%. You'll notice if I click the preview on and off, how it just appears a little bit more bright with the warming filter applied. The next filter in this section is Channel Mixer. And Channel Mixer isn't a setting that you'll probably use very often. It just gives you the ability to shift the red, green, and blue channels in some pretty funky ways. And again, there's presets, and you can achieve similar results like you did with some of the other filters. Like if I choose black and white with an orange filter, it's just a different form of conversion process. But in this case, instead of converting the image based upon what we used to use as normal filters, like red, green, blue, and yellow, and so on, it makes the conversion happen based upon the RGB channels, the red, green, and blue channels that exist in web-based images. So it's very similar in some respects. In other respects, it's completely different. And of course, you can also use it to enhance the colors just from a red, green, or blue perspective as well. So you're probably starting to get the idea that you have a lot of control over how your image appears. And the last one is color lookup that we're going to look at. And this is one that you're likely never going to use ever. And it's totally based on color profiles that really have very little to do with most of the work that you're going to be working in. The next section of image adjustments that we're going to look at are the ones in this section here that affect the color in different ways. The first one is invert, and it's pretty straightforward. It takes the colors that you see in your image, whether it's color or black and white, and it inverts them. Pretty much like that. So it creates a negative, essentially, of what your image is. And it's a very selective option. You're not going to use it on a daily basis, most likely. It's good to know that you have that available. One application where I can see it be very effective is if you're working with a graphic that is just black and white. And if you select the invert, it'll just switch those options from one to the other, from black to white, white to black. And therefore, it can save you a lot of time. So I'm going to undo that, and we'll take a look at the next adjustment, which is posterize. And posterize basically takes the colors in your image and averages them down to basic levels. And you can see here the default bottom level is level 4. The more I increase the slider, the more back to the original form that the picture becomes. It's very similar to what happens whenever you save an image as a GIF using the selective option that we looked at in one of the previous videos, except that instead of saving it here, you're just reducing the color. And it's a very specific effect. That here's level 2, which is at the extreme left. So it's just another way of reducing color information to achieve a special effect. Again, it's not a tool that you're going to use on a regular basis, but it could have some very specific limited uses. Next, we have threshold. Threshold I actually use a lot more, and the reason why is because it converts all the pixels in your image to either white or black. But what's cool about threshold is that you have control over which pixels get converted. So the more I move my slider to the left, the brighter the image becomes. We're averaging again based on the histogram. The further I move it to the right, the darker it becomes. So I actually have some control over creating a very high contrast image just based purely on threshold. Now I'll show you where this can actually come into play in a very interesting way. Let's create a layer, and I'm going to fill it to white. So I'm going to select white, and I'm going to choose Edit, Fill, and we're going to fill with a foreground color. And then the next thing I'm going to do is create, let's just create a rectangle. And I'm going to fill that rectangle to black. Okay, I'm going to hit Command or Control D to deselect the marquee selection, and I'm going to come to Filter and choose Gaussian Blur. And so you'll notice that the more I increase the slider, the more blurred our triangle becomes. So let's go with a setting, just randomly, something like that. Now, with this image here, okay, it's not a photograph, it's just a graphic, but if I come back up to Image Adjustments and choose Threshold, watch what happens. It actually sharpens the image, okay, but it does it based on the pixel values again. So again, the more I move it to the right, the more pixels are actually being made dark, which is why it's expanding, because remember, the original is out of focus. So by me moving the slider clear over here to the right, what it's saying is all the pixels from number 230 clear to 0, or clear to, to 0, are now black. That's basically what's happening. And if I move it the other way, you'll notice that it decreases in size, because what it's saying now is every pixel from number 251 all the way to 250, or from number 21 all the way to 255 is white. So it's creating an absolute in your graphic. But what's fun about that using threshold is that in some cases we may have an object that's a little bit blurry that we want to sharpen, and as long as it's black and white, just black or white, one of those two colors, threshold gives us the ability to do that very quickly, to sharpen it very quickly. But in the case of a photograph, threshold also gives us the ability to convert it into black or white, which can really lead to some pretty cool effects, as you would imagine. The next image adjustment is gradient map, and gradient map is kind of cool. Again, for special effects, what it does is it takes a gradient, like you see right here, black to white, which is the default, and it maps the tonal range of each pixel from 0 to 255 based on what the gradient is. So the default is black to white, so it looks like a normal black and white conversion. But what happens if you assign different colors to those same values? Well, I'll show you what happens. If we hit our drop-down menu and choose one of the default gradient maps that's installed with Photoshop, like this one here in the middle, it completely changes the look and appearance of our photograph, because now what's happening is it's telling the program, oh, by the way, pixel number 255, pure white, is now orange. And pixel number 0, pure black, is now purple. And all of these colors are assigned to each of those ranges of pixels. Remember, we've been talking about the histograms all along. Where that becomes really fun is we can go in and edit this. So we have full control. Like, let's say we want to have some yellow in the highlight area. I can click just where I would want to add that yellow, and then click again. You'll notice that the color selected. Come up, click on that color and get it to the yellow that I want. Click OK. And so now the pixels in that range are being affected. And if you have a color in here, say you add it and you decide, you know what, I don't really like that a lot, if you left mouse click and drag down, it'll remove it. Okay? See how it's vanishing? And then the color is restored it again. And of course, you can use any of the presets, or you can create your own gradient as well. You can really do whatever you want with it. Okay? So you can get some really funky, cool effects just by swapping out the colors using the gradient editor in combination with a gradient map. Next, and the last one here, is selective color. And again, selective color is kind of interesting. I like this a lot because it allows you to go in and make adjustments to your image or your photograph based on specific colors only. So like if I choose, let's say blue, since we have blue in the sky here, if I move the adjustment sliders, the only color it's going to affect is the blue. And in this case, it's affecting it kind of subtly, except for the black would affect it slightly more dynamically. So it's a subtle adjustment in most cases. okay? Same with, like, if I chose the greens, which we have as the trees here. You notice that I can adjust the appearance ever so slightly. It's a subtle change, okay? Relative and absolute is just how it affects the pixels, either globally or in relation to each other. So this isn't a dominant adjustment that you can use, but it's, again, a way of creating subtle changes. Like you'll notice here in the rocks, because there's red in the rocks, if I move the slider to the right, it softens the red and adds more blue. Same with the magenta. I can subtract magenta from it or add a little more to it. So it's yet another way of just tuning your image. The next set of adjustments that we're going to look at here in Photoshop are the shadows and highlights and HDR toning. And these are very specific for photographs and actually give you the ability to make some pretty significant changes to your photographs that otherwise you may not be able to accomplish. First, we're going to look at shadows and highlights. And the default setting here in Photoshop is to boost the shadows by 35%. And you'll notice that if I turn off the preview, it's affecting primarily just the shadow areas of the image. You can also darken the highlights here by a little bit just by moving the slider. I typically tend to drop this amount down to around 20 to 25%, but it's a way of increasing the shadows in a positive way so that it brings out additional detail in those areas that otherwise you may not be able to target. You'll notice that the mid-tone colors, like the sky and most of the rock, are virtually unaffected, just some of the darker areas of the rock. Now, you want to be careful when using this control and the next one as well, because it's very easy to push your photograph too far to where it looks unnatural, and unless you're after that effect. Now, this particular control does have more options. You'll notice here it says show more options, and it just gives you, it's the same controls basically expanded out in a really big way. So with the shadows, instead of the basic slider, you can control the tonal width, which is how it affects and interacts with the pixels in that range. Radius, again, is kind of like if you're adjusting the shadow pixels at, say, 0, the radius will expand it out to 30 or 50. You'll notice if I move the slider to the right, things start to get darker and more contrasty versus the left. So it's kind of just how the calculations are made related to the photograph. Same with tonal width. You notice that it gets brighter or darker based on the slider, and it's only affecting the shadow. You can do the same thing with the highlights. You can even adjust the colors here at this level. It's a subtle adjustment. I don't know if you can even see it. You'll notice that the reds are slightly increasing the more I move it to the right. So you can really fine-tune your image in some pretty cool ways, especially related specifically to shadows and highlight areas, to enhance those particular regions. And the reason why it targets those regions primarily is that the sensors that are in our camera do really good with the mid-tone range, but it's usually in those exposures, which are primarily targeting the midtones, that the highlights and the shadows often go to the extreme one way or the other. And so this particular adjustment gives us the ability to pull some of that data back in and rebalance the photograph to how it actually appeared when we viewed the scene with our eyes. The next adjustment is HDR toning, and it does essentially the same thing at a much higher level. And I usually, when I use this, which isn't very often, I just stay with the default preset and then make adjustments accordingly. Essentially what's happening behind the scenes here is that you have your original photo. Then the program seamlessly creates two additional versions, one that's overexposed, one that's underexposed, and then overlays those three together to give you a greater dynamic range of exposure. So you notice where we're able to bring out a lot more detail in the shadow and in the highlights, and we can control how those blend together. You'll notice here where it says edge glow. So edge glow, one of those layers is actually out of focus that it applies to that, and it affects the exposure in some pretty cool ways. It helps get rid of a lot of extra noise that may be introduced into the image, and you notice if I move the slider to the left, look what happens to the rocks here versus to the right. You can see the changes that are happening, and you also can control the strength, which you'll notice that by increasing the strength, it's actually starting to sharpen the image. So there's a lot of behind-the-scenes math that's going on, but it's a fairly quick way to enhance your image and bring out some of those shadow details and highlights and boost color all simultaneously. Now, this same effect can be achieved by taking multiple pictures in camera and combining them together into one. This is kind of a cheat to mimic that effect, but in many cases, depending on your photograph, it can be very effective. Next, we have desaturate, and it's exactly what you think it is. When I click on it, it takes your color image and removes all the color out of it to just black and white. However, you'll notice that if we go up to image mode, the image is still RGB. So while it does remove the color from the image, it doesn't change it into a grayscale image, and that can be significant. Okay, especially if you're outputting in certain scenarios like for print. You're going to get a much richer looking image or photograph if it's RGB or CMYK and grayscale versus if you just converted it to grayscale. Okay, so let me undo that and let's take a look at the next adjustment. The next adjustment is match color. And match color is probably one that you won't likely use much. The primary purpose of it is if you have taken a number of photographs and you tweak one of them to where you like it, and you're working on other photographs that have a similar color and tonal range, you can actually use that previous photograph to globally adjust the new photograph that you're working in now. So I'm going to show you an extreme example. You'll notice here at the bottom it says source. So I'm going to, and the current source is none. So I'm going to actually choose the sunset image that we had of the windmill earlier as my source image, and watch what happens. It takes the color tonal range of that particular photograph and applies it to our source photograph here now, and resets and matches the colors to this image versus what was there for this one. So you can see in this case it's extreme and it doesn't give us a desirable result. But if we had a different version of, say, this one here, this photograph, let me just change that back to none, and we applied it in the same form, it would auto adjust everything in the photograph to match the target that we just imported. So it's especially handy if you're needing to retouch a lot of images that are very similar. It can save you a lot of time that way. But beyond that, it's very limited in its use. And of course, these image options up here just control how the color interacts with the image that you're seeing on the screen, the image that you're working with. Next, we have replace color, and replace color is a very handy tool. It's another adjustment that you may use a lot in certain situations, and here's how it works. You select an area that you want to affect. Like, let's say we want to adjust the sky and replace the color from its kind of drab blue gray that exists right now. So I'm going to sample that, and you'll notice here that it highlights in reverse in this area here. And fuzziness controls it's basically a slider that controls how much of the tonal range is being affected based on the image or the pixel area that I selected. Now, what's really interesting about this is that you can add to or subtract from this initial selection just by choosing the eyedropper with the plus tool. If I click, say, this area here, you'll notice that that was added to the selection. If I go with the whites, that was added to the selection as well. And let's say I just keep eyedroppering until I'm sure that all of the various blues are selected. Now you'll notice that it's also sampling some values from the rocks, and that's because of the white area of the sky that I picked. So let's say I want to remove that. So I'm going to choose the negative eyedropper and just click on that area alone. And so it removes some of that from the rock. I can also control that some using the fuzziness. So just move that slider to the left. If I move it to the right, you'll notice it affects more of the image. But here's where this is so powerful. So you can see here is the default resulting color, okay, the average. If I come down here where it says replacement and start adjusting the hue, watch what happens. It affects the color of the sky. It's basically replacing its color, but none of the other image, none of anything that is black here is not being affected at all. So the only thing that's being replaced are the areas that are showing up in the white. If I move the fuzziness scale, you'll notice that it'll impact the image a little bit more. Okay, but I could actually, using the negative eyedropper, come over and remove some of those rock areas so that they don't show up. Let's just move this over here. So you can play around with where the subtle balance is based upon what you want to change or not change. And of course, you can also affect the saturation and the lightness. So this can have some very far-reaching and fun options for you depending on the type of image that you're working in. So like we could start over and just say focus on the sky, or not the sky, the trees. And by the way, you can also turn your eyedropper into a plus by holding the shift key down. Notice how it turns into the plus by me holding the shift key down, or I can select it here. So now most of the sky is selected, or why do I keep saying sky, the trees. And you'll notice that there's some green in this area too, from moss and stuff. That's why that also showed up. So now I can literally change the color of the trees to any other color, and it's not affecting anything else in the scene except for the areas where there is green. So you can see how this could be really effective. You could actually use it, like if we switch over here to Dexter's Lab and choose Adjustments, Replace Color, I can select just the yellow and increase the fuzziness to make sure that I get just the yellow, and then come down here to Hue, and as I move the slider, I can change his hair to pretty much anything that I want. And the more I increase the slider, the more it gets rid of the outlining that's happening. So it's a very powerful tool that can be used in a lot of different ways. And then we could also bring it up again and change the color of his gloves. So replace color can be very effective in adjusting some of the images and photographs that you're working on. The last one that we're going to take a look at here is, let's go back to our picture here, is equalize. And equalize really doesn't give you any controls. It just reads the image and decides, this is what I think looks best overall. Essentially, in a lot of respects, you could say that it's a combination of all the above, sort of, kind of, but when you click equalize, it just reads everything in the image and adjusts it automatically. And actually, I found that its adjustments are very good. This actually is a very appealing looking end result, and we can compare it to the original. You can see it's pretty dramatically different. And so, like, all the adjustments that I made over the course of us going through the adjustment tools, let's go back here to the original and apply equalize again. So you notice that it's based on what it sees at the time, because this looks different compared to what we had before. Okay, so see, this was the equalize that we applied first, and so it applied it to the image based upon the other adjustments that we had already made. So that's one thing to keep in mind whenever you're working with equalize, is that it works with what it has. It doesn't go back to the original source image unless you use it with the original source image. Photoshop provides us with a number of tools that allow us to adjust the image itself, regardless of whether it's a photograph or a graphic design that we're creating. If we click Image and come down below where the adjustments layers were, you'll notice that we have image size, canvas size, image rotation, and trim. I want to take a look here at image size because it's one that you're going to use quite a bit. You'll notice that right now our image is set to 5760 pixels by 3840. Let's switch this over to inches just so we have a slightly smaller set of numbers to work with. So right now our resolution is set to 72, and if we want to, say, increase or decrease our number, say we want to scale it to 50 inches, you'll notice that it automatically adjusts the height because our little chain here is clicked. If I unclick that, it'll adjust each of the width and height independently of the other. Okay, so if I go back to, say, 50 and choose OK, it will resize the image. You also notice that resample is checked and it has automatic, but they also give us a number of other options: preserving details, which is primarily enlargement, bicubic sharper, because when you take a large image and start to reduce it, it does make it a little bit blurrier. So we could either go with automatic and let the program sense which one makes the most sense, or we can choose one that we feel, based on experience, works best. If we don't want to resize the image but just change the dimensions, watch what happens if I unclick resample. Okay, you'll notice that if I change the resolution from 72 to 300, it automatically reduces the size of the image. And why is that? Well, it's still the same number of pixels. You notice the dimensions at the top haven't changed. So all that you're doing is resetting what the resolution is. You're not affecting the size. If I choose resample, and let's say we go with 72, okay, you'll notice now the pixels have changed. 1382 by 922. So we're literally resizing the image under those settings. Now you might ask, why does that even matter? Well, it can matter in some pretty interesting ways, because depending on the image that you're working with, it gives you a way of adjusting the resolution without needing to scale it up or lose anything. You can actually find out how much of your image resolution you have to work with if you're moving, say, from web to print. Okay, so like if you have an image that's, say, 1800 pixels, if you divide 1800 by 300, you're going to end up with 6. So at 300 dots per inch print resolution, your image is going to be 6 inches wide. Okay, and like with this image here, let's just reset this for a moment. It's 72 pixels, which is screen resolution, and we set this to images. This image is 80 inches wide, 80 inches. If we turn off resampling and change our resolution to 300, it's now 19.2 inches high. We haven't removed any pixels, it actually just makes it sharper, but the width and the height is different. And so that's where it comes into play. It really depends on what you're after. Now, in some cases, you may have an image that you want to scale up that's smaller than you prefer, and you need to scale it up a little bit larger. And that's where it can make sense, perhaps, to use like bicubic smoother or preserve details, depending on the type of image that you're working with. We also have canvas size. Now, canvas size works different from image size. Canvas size starts with the current size of the image that you have, and you'll notice you have the little arrows here. So let's say that I actually wanted to make this image taller or add additional canvas space to the image, say at the bottom. Okay, so I can change the height from 53 to, say, 70, and choose the anchor point to be top center. So what that tells the program is that the additional length that I'm adding should just be applied to the bottom. If I click the bottom center, it's saying that it should be applied to the top. And then as the program extends the canvas, I can actually choose how it does that. Do I want it to use the background color, the foreground color, white, black, gray, or other? Okay, so in this case, I'm probably going to choose black. So what happens when I click OK, it extends the canvas with the black color, and then the original photograph is here. So now it's higher than what it was before we applied the canvas setting. And I found very often, just as a side note, that if you're working with photographs especially and you want to extend the canvas, it's usually not a bad idea to make a copy of your background image first. And we'll just left mouse click and drag it down onto the create a layer button here at the bottom. And then whenever we apply canvas size, let's just make it a little bit smaller, it still has the same end result, but you'll notice now the original photograph is preserved without any, the color added. And so there's an advantage to approaching it that way. In that same area, we also have image rotation, and this gives us the ability to rotate the image, a full 180 degrees, so just rotate it around, 90 degrees clockwise or counterclockwise, and arbitrary. Arbitrary is basically just entering in what angle you'd prefer, say 25. And do you want it to rotate clockwise or counterclockwise? Let's say clockwise. When I click OK, it rotates everything. Now, unlike transform, which we looked at earlier, transform just affects the layer, okay? The layer that you're applying the transform to. The image rotation that we just applied affects everything, and you'll notice that. If I turn off the layer that we had created, you'll notice that it actually rotated the entire canvas and everything. Okay, and then it filled it in with white. So you want to make sure to use that distinction depending on the end result that you're out to achieve. Another option that we have that isn't actually available to us unless we have a selection made is crop. And what it will essentially do with the selection made, if I choose crop, it will crop to just that selection, and you'll notice how it did that. Next, we have trim. And trim has some uses to it that can come in handy. Depending on the types of images that you're working with and other layers. And let me give you an example. Let's copy this background so that we have an additional layer. And I'm going to make it a little smaller so it's easier to see this. And then I'm going to use transform to just scale up the layer. And so you notice that, let me just turn the background off here. You'll notice that I can move this layer around because of how I scaled it. So let's say that I want it to just fit into this area. So by fitting it into this area, we have all this extra part of the image over here to the left. See, it's still there if I slide it over. But if I come up to image and choose trim, what it will do is it gives us the option. We can choose based on transparent pixels or the bottom left corner or whatever. We can determine how it trims. And essentially, it's kind of like taking a pair of scissors and cutting off all the excess. Okay, so the default is a top left pixel color, and that's what we're going to use. If I click OK, watch what happens to the image now. Now when I move it, notice that all that excess is gone. Okay, so that's where it really comes in handy. In previous versions of Photoshop, I believe this was referred to as crop. Okay, but now it's called trim, and it's under this section here. Reveal all basically does the opposite. It actually, if we undo the trim, let me just undo that using history. If we come up to reveal all, you'll see that it resizes the image based on what was previously there. In other words, if I turn off the bottom layer and show the background, you'll see that it actually rescaled the entire image based on the larger size that I had scaled this layer up to. And then it just added the background color to make up the difference. Okay, so it's essentially the opposite of trim. In an earlier video, I introduced you to the tools that are available for you to use in Photoshop. Beginning with this video, we're actually going to go through the tool panel and take a deeper look at many of the tools that are available to us. There's a few that we aren't going to cover just because it's likely you would never use them in a design setting, but there's quite a few that you will use, in some cases, on a regular daily basis. The first of those tools that we're going to take a look at are the marquee tools, and you'll notice that it's number 2 on the tool palette over here. And with the marquee tools, we have a number of selections. We have the rectangular marquee tool, elliptical. We also have the single row marquee tool and the single column marquee tool. And I'm primarily going to focus on the rectangular and the elliptical marquee tool because those are the two that you're likely going to use the most. First of all, with either of the marquee tools, whether it's rectangular or the elliptical, if you want to use that, which simply the way it works is to left mouse click and drag, and it will create a marquee. You can see by what some people refer to as the marching ants. It defines the area that you've just selected. And normally, just by left mouse clicking and dragging, you can create a marquee tool selection however you draw it. But if you hold the shift key down, whether you're a Mac or a PC user, it'll constrain the proportions to a square if you're using the rectangular marquee tool, or to a circle if you're using the elliptical marquee tool. Now, normally, if you're not holding the shift key down with the elliptical tool, you can, again, create a selection that isn't perfectly round. So if you want to create an oval or something like that, then you would not want to hold the shift key down. Now, the selection tools here have a number of uses depending on what you're after. And a couple things that I want to point out here is that as we move forward in looking at these tools, it's always a good idea to not work on your original layer. Either make a copy of an image that you're working on or a graphic, or just create a new layer. Like, for instance, let's say that we are working with this tomato photo here and we wanted to use it as the background image for, say, a PowerPoint slide or something like that. And I wanted to ghost out the center part of the photograph here because that's where we're going to enter the text of our PowerPoint presentation. Well, the rectangular marquee tool is the tool that we would want to use for that. Okay, so the first thing that I would do is actually create a new layer by clicking on the little button down here next to the trash can in the layers panel, and it creates a new blank layer. Then I would make sure that my rectangular marquee tool is selected, and I'm just going to left click and drag. I'm kind of eyeballing it here so that all the borders are roughly the same, okay? And so now I have a selection that represents what I just created with the rectangular marquee tool. So now I have options. I can fill this with a color, like let's say I wanted to fill it with a cream color. Just by clicking on the foreground image here, which is the green button in this particular case, I can use the eyedropper tool that comes with the color picker and choose a color right off of the photograph. One that, perhaps I like that one there, or maybe use something like that. Or I could just randomly pick a color as well. So I'll click OK. And then with the layer 1 selected, and we're going to get into layers a lot more in a future video, but with layer 1 selected, I can choose Edit, Fill. I want to make sure that I choose foreground color because that's the color that has our pink color. You also have other options, background color, color content aware, pattern history, and so on. But you're primarily going to use foreground color most of the time. Blending mode, normally you would leave at normal, and opacity you would normally leave at 100% because you can adjust those independently on the layer itself. So I'm going to click OK, and it fills it with that color. Now, you'll notice that the marquee selection is still active because the little marching men are still marching around. And you can choose to leave it active, or you can deselect it. Now, the simplest way to deselect it, you have a couple options. One is to just click outside the image area where it isn't selected, and that'll deselect it. Another option is to hit Control or Command D, which is deselect, and that'll take care of it as well. Okay. Now, with this image, you'll notice that it's solid. Okay, this pink color is solid. If we come over here to the layer panel, to where it says opacity, if I start dragging the slider to the left, you'll notice that now we can see just a little bit of the tomatoes through our background. Okay, now let me show you another option that you can use the rectangular marquee tool the exact same way, except to get a different effect. Okay, so I'm going to choose a smaller rectangular area. The same will work if you use the elliptical marquee tool. So I'm going to pick, say, this area right here. And instead of creating a new layer and filling it with a color, what I'm going to do is actually, with the background selected, which is where the tomato photo is, I'm going to copy, which is Control or Command C, and I'm going to just paste right into what's already there, which is Control or Command V. And you'll notice, if you look over here in the layer panel, that it copied the selection that I had created from the background and created a new layer whenever I pasted. And you notice that the selection is no longer active. Okay, now a little side trick. If you want to make this selection active again, if you hold the Command or the Control key down and click, notice how the hand tool becomes a marquee tool. So if I hold the Command or Control key down, depending on whether you're PC or Mac, and click on that layer, it automatically reselects that area. Okay, so you might think, well, what's the benefit of that? Because it looks exactly the same. Well, once you have this new layer created that you selected with the rectangular marquee tool, you have a lot of options. Like, for instance, let's say we wanted to shift the color of the tomatoes. We could very easily bring up our hue panel, which is Command U or Control U. And if I do that, you'll see we bring up hue and saturation. And now with this layer selected, this new one that we created from the rectangular marquee tool, I can move the hue slider and it shifts the color of the tomatoes. So like if I wanted to make them green tomatoes or something like that, I can do so. And if that's a little too bright for me, I can turn the saturation down. That's actually pretty darn close to looking like green tomatoes. And then I can just hit OK. And so now, just from the rectangular marquee tool that we used, we're able to completely change and give this a different look. Okay? The same thing can be true with using the elliptical marquee tool. Okay, just to give you a brief example, I can create just an oval or a circle like this. And by the way, if you need to move this, your selection, once you've created it, while it's active, if you left mouse click and drag, you can move it around your image without it affecting anything underneath it. Okay, so like I could select the background layer again and create a new layer. Well, actually, you know what? Let's do this. Let's make a copy of the tomato and paste it just like we did before. Except this time, what we're going to do is we're going to change the color a little bit, but we're going to use a different method to change it. Remember, previously, under Image, we looked at the different adjustments, and we had Replace Color. And so what I'm going to do is, with just this selection, I'm going to choose the red, and I'm going to hold the Shift key down, or we could choose the eyedropper with the plus, and select all the different areas of the red until it all looks solid. Okay? And I'm just going to move the slider down just a little bit to make sure that I'm just getting mostly the tomato. Okay, now the cool thing is that I can essentially do the same thing that I did with hue, but I have a little bit more control because I'm only focusing on one specific color, and that's the red. So now if I shift the hue, it's only affecting the red of the tomato, and you would actually be able to see this better. Let's delete that. And let's just select this portion here. Okay. And now we'll bring up adjustments, replace color. And the reason why I went with this is because we have the green here. Okay, so now I want to choose just the red. And let's add to the selection here a little bit. And we can increase the fuzziness a little bit because we don't want to select the green area. We just want the red because remember, we're just replacing that. Okay, so now if I start to shift the color, you notice that the stem itself is pretty much remaining the same, but I can change that part of the tomato to anything that I want. So it's an easy way of selecting an area that we can then use together with other tools, like the adjustment tools or on a layer or something like that. Another great benefit of working with the marquee tools is if we wanted to build an image from scratch just using geometric shapes. So like if I, let me just create a new layer here, and we're going to fill it with white. Choose Edit, Fill, Foreground Color, and then I could use the marquee tool to build up different elements of this area. Like if I wanted to create shapes, like for instance, if we were creating a book cover or a label design or something like that, just by simply using the marquee tool, we can create some really cool graphic areas and do some interesting things with it. Another thing that I should point out at this stage with selection is the keystroke command Control A or Command A selects the entire frame. So like if I choose Control A, it selects all. Okay, which is kind of like the rectangular marquee tool, except that it's just a keystroke command. So let's say now that we wanted to create an area over here on the right. I'm just going to draw something quick, say right here. And we want to fill it with blue. You know, we could come over here and sample a blue. That'll work. And we'll choose Edit, Fill, Foreground Color. And you notice that I came over here to the color picker instead of clicking on the foreground color. You can really work either way. It depends on what, you know, what's most comfortable for you. And then I can create another layer. We'll deselect that selection, and I could create another layer that perhaps we select this area, and I want to maybe pick a nice yellow with Edit, Fill, and deselect. And so you can see where we can build some very basic shapes. Create an elliptical tool, and I'm going to start like here and just drag it here and then reposition this like so. And by the way, you can also use the directional arrows on your keyboard to move it. So if I use the right arrow, it'll move the selection to the right or the left, up and down. Okay. And then let's say we go with a darker color, maybe something like that. And I'm going to create another layer, Edit, Fill, click OK. And so you can see where we're building up some basic design elements just using the marquee tool. Okay, and then we can apply special effects and all that kind of stuff, drop shadows and glows and all those kinds of fun things to it later, which we'll get into in a later video when we're looking at layers. But I just wanted to show what's available to you now, just with the elliptical and the rectangular marquee tool. Next, we're going to look at the lasso tool, the polygonal lasso tool, and the magnetic lasso tool. The next tool that we're going to look at in our selection family is the Magic Wand tool and the Quick Selection tool. The Magic Wand tool has been in Photoshop pretty much from the beginning, and it works pretty straightforward. In this photograph, we're going to use this photo that I took of an avocado to demonstrate it. So let's say that we want to select just the white area to ultimately remove it. Well, we can simply click in the white area, and based upon what we have set for tolerance, we'll determine how much of the area it will actually select. So in other words, wherever I click with my Magic Wand tool, it will say, okay, so if the value of the pixel is say 255, going back to our earlier discussions about histograms, which is pure white, 255, then 255 minus 32, it'll select every pixel in that range. Okay, now, just like the other selection tools, if I hold the Shift key down, you'll notice that the Magic Wand turns into a plus. If I hold the Alt or Option key down, it turns into a minus. So if I want to add this section here, I have a couple choices. I can either increase the tolerance, or I can hold the Shift key down and click again, and continue to do so until I have the shape close enough to where I want to create my selection. Now, you'll notice that this last click that I made actually selected part of the exterior of the avocado, and that's not good. So I might want to undo that, which is Control Z or Command Z, depending on whether you're on a PC or a Mac. And so that brings up my selection, and it's about as close as I'm going to get using the Magic Wand. And I'll show you just what the end result looks like. If I select right now, if I copy right now, like we did in the tomato example earlier, because we were selecting the white, all that I'll copy is the white. So let's say that I want to isolate just the avocado. I need to invert this selection. Okay, so right now the selection, because we were selecting white, that's the only thing that's selected. What we're after is to have the white unselected and the avocado selected. So in order to switch that around, we want to hold down the Shift key, the Command key on a Mac, or Control key on a PC. So it's Shift Control on a PC, Shift Command on a Mac, and the letter I. And whenever I hit the letter I, it inverses the selection. So now you'll notice that the only thing that's selected is the avocado. So if I hit copy, Control C, and paste, Control V, and turn off the background layer, you'll notice that we have the avocado selected. Now, it's also a very sharp edge, and remember in the previous video what I mentioned about softening the edge, so you may want to feather the edge a pixel or two just to take some of the harshness off. So you might be wondering, well, that's great, Tony, but we still have this drop shadow. What do we do about that? Well, that's where some of the future tools that we're going to look at, like the eraser tool, comes in handy, where we can actually go in and, depending on the brush that we choose, we can actually erase the balance of that selection. So we can just come in here and erase the remaining drop shadow so that we ultimately end up with just the avocado. And the tool that I'm using here, the brush that I'm using with the eraser tool, is actually, I have a hardness of 0. We probably should have a hardness of about 70, just so that it's a soft edge, but it's not so soft that it looks stupid. So you notice if I use a softness of 70, it's very similar to what we had achieved with the Magic Wand tool. And if you decide, you know what, that isn't quite perfect, you can always hit undo and just go back and remove that part, and then we can come in and remove this part of the shadow. And all that I'm doing is holding my left mouse button down with the eraser tool selected. So once it's erased, this area is erased. This is a permanent correction, unless we either hit undo to remove one or to change it back to the previous action that we took, or we can use the history tool. You'll notice that there's 2 sets of eraser, so I could go back to paste and get back what I had erased earlier. So there's a couple ways of hitting undo. And so there you have it. We have our avocado. Now, if you compare that to the original, you'll notice that the back image was actually softer, so it didn't have the hard edge like we have now. So it kind of looks a little awkward. So you might be thinking, how do you get that? And essentially, what the easiest way to do that is that whenever you're working with a Magic Wand tool, okay, there really is no way of getting a soft edge unless you use feather after the fact. Okay, so it's important to keep that in mind. But the other tool that we have here, which is the Quick Select tool, I like a lot because you can get a bit more specific with it. It combines the Magic Wand tool together with define edges, so that similar to what we saw whenever we were using the magnetic lasso tool, works very similarly, but it works extremely fast. You can control the area that you're working with because it gives you the ability to adjust the size and the hardness and all of that. And I'll show you where this can be an advantage. So let's say we turn the hardness down to 60 and we'll leave the size at 30. If I come up here and select, notice how all I'm doing is I have my left mouse button held down. And so it's selecting, notice that in Quick Select, it's just selecting very quickly. And again, up here, you'll notice that there are 3 options. You have the Quick Select tool, just creating a new selection. Then you have Add To and Subtract From, just like most of the tools. But you can choose the Add tool as you're selecting. And all that I'm doing is holding my left mouse button down, and I'm dragging my brush along. Okay? And so now the whole thing is selected, and I can actually go in and define the shadow area a little bit more. But you might be thinking, yeah, but Tony, you also got part of the skin here. So what I can do is actually decrease the size of my brush to maybe 10. Choose the Subtract tool. Okay? And just run my brush in that area. And you might think, well, yeah, but you also picked up some of the shadow again. That's okay. We're going to go in and fine-tune it. And that's one of the beautiful things about this tool is, unlike any of the other selection tools, we can go in and really fine-tune and get a pretty accurate selection fairly quickly. Now, let me show you the difference in using this particular tool. I'm going to inverse the selection again using Control-Shift-I, or Command-Shift-I, and I'm going to copy it just like before and paste. So now you notice that we have a very clean edge. Okay? Clean like before, except that we were able to remove the shadow and everything without having to go in and erase. Now, one other thing that I'm going to do is go back to our selection before, and this time I'm going to hit Select, Modify Feather, and we're going to feather it, say 5 pixels. And I'm going to copy and paste. And now 5 pixels was probably a little bit much. Okay, so let's undo that and choose feather, say 2 pixels. It really depends on the size of your image. I'm working with a smaller image, so a couple pixels is a big deal when it comes to smaller images. So I'm going to copy and paste. And so now it's not bad. You'll notice that it matches it fairly closely that we have around the edge. And in this particular case, let's just take it one more step and go to just 1 pixel. Copy and paste. Yeah, I think that's completely acceptable. So the drop shadow is moved, the background is removed, and everything is completely silhouetted the way we want to. So I'm just going to save this here real quick. Don't need to show that again. Now, there's one more type of selection that I want to show you here real quick in this video. It's not directly related to the Magic Wand tool or the Quick Selection tool, but it's just as powerful if used correctly. And that is under Select again. It's called Color Range. And if I click on Color Range, you might notice that the interface looks somewhat familiar to replace color, and it works very similar to that. Let's say, for instance, that we wanted to make a selection of just the seed of the avocado. So if I click on the seed and hold the Shift key down to add to it, you'll notice over here in the selection area, you can actually see how much I'm selecting, okay? And then I can use fuzziness to include the remaining area. So we're pretty close there. There's a little bit of brown in the stem here, and that's what's picking up here. So once I have this fairly solid and I'm happy with it, if I click OK, you'll notice that it selects just the seed. Now, you also notice that there's a couple small areas that I missed, and or that got picked up and they shouldn't be. So we can come back to, say, the polygonal lasso tool, or the regular lasso tool, and if I hold the Shift key down, which turns it into a plus, I can just draw around these couple of spots here so that they're included. And if I hold the Option or the Alt key down and draw around these little spots, they're excluded. Okay, and you also notice that over here, there's one tiny little area that didn't get included. So I'm just going to hold the Shift key down and draw in that little spot there. And so now whenever I copy and paste, I have just the seed. And of course, I could also choose to, instead of copying and pasting, I could also use that selection just like we have in the past to say, let's feather it by just 1. And then I could bring up hue and saturation, which is, well, actually, let's do something different. Let's bring up levels, which is Control or Command L. And that gives us the ability to lighten or darken. So I could really darken the seed if I wanted to. Make it more contrasty looking. Or if I wanted to shift the color, I could use hue and saturation, which is Control or Command U. So there you go. We have a lot of options that we can work with our images and control them just using Select. The next tool set that we're going to look at are the lasso tools, and you'll find those directly under the marquee tools. And the lasso tools give us 3 options. We have the lasso tool, the polygonal lasso tool, and the magnetic lasso tool. And we're going to use the tomato picture again just to demonstrate these. They work pretty much the same as the marquee tool, except that you have a lot more control. You're not confined to a specific shape like a rectangle or an oval. With the primary lasso tool, it's a freehand tool that allows you to draw around your object, whatever it is that you want to select. So let's say that we wanted to select just this tomato right here. We can simply choose the lasso tool, left mouse click and hold the left mouse button down, and as we draw, it will create a selection everywhere we draw. It's very precise, and it's a little bit challenging to get it exact, but there you have it. As soon as I release my mouse button, it turns that into a selection. Okay, now, the freehand version, the regular lasso tool, can work in some areas pretty handily, especially if you don't need to do precise outlining like we were attempting to do in this particular case. However, if you want to do precise selections, the lasso tool may not be your best option. The polygonal lasso tool actually gives us a little bit more control. I'm going to zoom in here on my tomato a little bit. And by the way, I should point out, you'll notice that with the, let me just select the polygonal lasso tool, and you'll notice that my cursor looks like the tool. If I turn the cap lock key on, it turns into a crosshair. Okay, so you might want to keep that in mind if you need to do something a little bit more precise and want to work with the crosshair. Turning the cap lock on will convert the tool into a crosshair. Turning it off will show the pointer with the picture of the tool. Okay, now, the way the polygonal lasso tool works different than the regular lasso tool is that it creates points. Every time you click your left mouse button, it creates a new point. And these are straight lines. So, like you're going, if I click here, you'll notice that it's creating a straight line. And wherever I click the next time, it continues the selection until I get back here to the beginning. If I'm not exactly sure where the beginning is, or I'm done clicking and I'm close, you can double click and that'll fill in the gap. Okay? But you can also use it to be a little bit more precise in selecting an object, especially if you zoom in. So like with this tomato here, I can just start clicking points around the edge of the tomato, and you'll notice that it's a little bit easier for me to follow than trying to freehand draw it with the regular lasso tool. So I can just go right around here until I'm finished, and let's say that I'm finished. And whenever I get up close to my starting point, which in some cases, depending on the image, may be a little challenging to see, you'll notice that a little circle appears whenever I'm close to my start point. And that lets me know when the circle appears that if I left mouse click again, it'll complete the selection like that. Okay? And then the last tool that we have for our lasso is the magnetic lasso. And the magnetic lasso is kind of cool because it uses edge detection to guesstimate where the edge is of whatever you're silhouetting around. And this works better in some cases than others. But if I left mouse click to create an anchor point and just start drawing around the edge of the image, as long as I'm close, the program will automatically insert anchor points for me, you'll notice. All that I'm doing is moving my mouse. I don't even have the mouse button pushed down. So it's guesstimating where those anchor points should be. Or I can also hold the mouse button down and it adds more anchor points, you'll notice, in very regular fashion. Or as I'm dragging along, I can choose where I want an anchor point to appear just by clicking. And the selection will follow the edge. You can see here it's following the edge. And it's usually a good idea to go fairly slow. It can be tricked, but it's a much easier way of trying to silhouette an object out, as you can see here. And there's the circle, so I can click. And so what can we do with this? Well, the same thing that we could with the regular marquee tools that we looked at earlier. I can bring up color replace or hue and saturation, Control U in this case, again, or Command U, and we can change just the color of the tomato. So whenever I zoom out, deselect that, you notice that this tomato is green and all the others are red. So it gives you the opportunity to go in and create some really cool effects without a lot of extra work.